If Genesis were pure myth, why does it read like a historical record instead of a legend? Unlike mythological texts, which speak of gods on distant mountains, Genesis is anchored in real-world genealogies, locations, and timelines. It names rivers, regions, family lines, and even specifies ages details foreign to mythology. Myths avoid specifics. Genesis documents them with journalistic precision. Consider the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. It traces the origins of peoples after the flood. For centuries, critics dismissed names like the Hittites as fiction, until archaeology uncovered the ruins of their vast empire, confirming they existed exactly where Genesis placed them. Many ancient city names in Genesis, like Ur of the Chaldees, were once dismissed as folklore, until archaeologists like Sir Leonard Woolley unearthed them in the 1920s, revealing a sophisticated civilization just as described. Genesis also preserves a unique, counterintuitive detail: the extraordinarily long lifespans of early humanity. While modern science debates the mechanism, it's not an isolated claim. Ancient Sumerian king lists also record impossibly long reigns in humanity's earliest periods. Before a great flood, after which the reigns became much shorter. Different cultures, one memory. The ancient world was different. Then there's the Tower of Babel. Genesis describes humanity united by one language. Attempting to build a centralized globalist power before God scattered them by confusing their speech. Today, linguistics confirms that most languages can be traced back to common roots, with evidence of sudden divergence, not slow, uniform evolution, occurring early in human history. Genesis claims humanity fractured outward from unity, and the linguistic data aligns with this model. But perhaps the most important part of Genesis isn't the historical debate, it's the promise. In Genesis 3, right after humanity's fall, God gives what theologians call the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. He promises that a future offspring of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, evil itself, though he himself would be wounded in the process. This is the first messianic prophecy in the Bible, a thread of hope woven from the very beginning. Genesis is not just about beginnings, it's about direction. It introduces Abraham not as a king or warrior, but as an elderly nomad, chosen by God to become the father of a nation through whom all families of the earth would be blessed. That singular promise doesn't end in Genesis. It carries through the entirety of Scripture, echoed by the prophets, and Christians believe it culminates in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Genesis explains why redemption is necessary before the rest of the Bible explains how it comes. It establishes the framework. The world was created good. Humanity chose rebellion, and God responded with patience, judgment, and an unbreakable promise. That framework of creation, fall, and redemption still explains the human condition better than any alternative. Genesis isn't outdated. It's foundational. And whether one believes it or not, the questions Genesis asks about our origin, purpose, and destiny are the same questions every human still wrestles with today.
And once Genesis lays the foundation of creation, fall, and flood, it narrows its focus, not to an empire, not to a civilization, but to one man, Abraham. Genesis presents Abraham not as a mythic hero, but as a historical figure who lived, traveled, failed, obeyed, doubted, and believed. His journey traces real geographic locations that still exist today: Ur, Haran, Shechem, Egypt. For centuries, critics claimed these places were symbolic. Then archaeology uncovered them. Genesis records ancient customs, covenant rituals, inheritance laws, bride prices, that perfectly match what we now know of Middle Bronze Age Mesopotamia. These details weren't known by later writers. They had to come from the time period Genesis describes. Abraham's story introduces something radical: a God who chooses relationship over domination. God doesn't enslave Abraham. He makes a covenant, a promise that through Abraham's lineage all nations of the earth would be blessed. That's not nationalism. That's global purpose. Genesis then follows Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, not as legends, but as deeply flawed humans. Jacob deceives. Joseph is betrayed. Families fracture. And yet, throughout the chaos, Genesis repeats a theme that echoes through all of Scripture. What humans mean for evil, God uses for good. Joseph E.S. account places Genesis directly into Egypt, and here U.S., where critics used to push back hardest. For a long time, scholars claimed Hebrews couldn't have risen to power in Egypt the way Genesis describes. Then, Egyptian records surfaced showing Semitic officials serving under pharaohs during the exact era Genesis places Joseph. Even Joseph's role, administrator during a famine, aligns with known Egyptian practices. Genesis doesn't exaggerate Egypt. It understands it, and that matters. Because Genesis is not myth written late, it's memory preserved early. Then, there's something Genesis does that no mythology does. It refuses to glorify its heroes. Abraham lies. Isaac repeats it. Jacob manipulates. Judah fails morally. Ancient legends sanitize their founders. Genesis exposes them. Why? Because Genesis isn't trying to elevate humans. It's trying to reveal God's faithfulness despite human failure. That honesty is one of the strongest indicators of authenticity. And running beneath every story is the promise first whispered in Eden, that evil will not win, that death will not have the final word, and that restoration is coming through a specific lineage. Genesis isn't obsessed with dates, it's obsessed with direction. From creation to covenant, from rebellion to redemption, from chaos toward order. It explains why humanity longs for justice, meaning, and restoration, yet repeatedly fails to achieve it alone. Genesis ends not with resolution, but anticipation. Israel is in Egypt. The promise is intact. The fulfillment is still ahead, and that's intentional. Genesis doesn't close the story, it opens it. It tells us who God is, who humanity is, why the world is broken, and why hope is reasonable. Not because humans are good, but because God is faithful. And that's why Genesis isn't just the beginning of the Bible. It's the framework that makes the rest of it make sense.